Good morning again, everyone. Welcome back to the KSR YouTube channel. Another day on Mullet. Today is mostly plumbing and mounting other small things. We're working on a bracket for the fuel pressure regulator, which has actually already been made. It's just being painted. The boost controller solenoids are going up here on another bracket, kind of to offset the, kind of be opposite of the fuel pressure regulator. Our oil line for the turbo feeds is right here. So we're going to be making some tabs off the back of it because I don't want zip ties wrapped around the charge pipe. Just I want to, when you look at the car, I just want it to be bam, turbos and clean looking charge piping. So we got to go through some extra steps just to make sure that everything stay hidden. We do have a throttle cable bracket to make. We're going to be using these bolts here to make a throttle cable bracket. You see it goes under the intake manifold. The street fuel system we've started to plumb it. That tank is mounted in the back. Got the brackets welded to that. Started working on the turbo oil drains. You can see I got my mark on there. I'm getting ready to cut that. So we're going to keep cranking along on this thing, bring you guys along for the ride. All right, so like I said, this video is starting out with us doing a lot of plumbing on Mullet. Already since I kicked the video off, you can see the bracket for the fuel pressure regulator and then the boost control solenoids right there. We're working on plumbing those, and I've got a turbo oil drain line here. We are using Earl's Ultra Pro hoses, and we're using the crimp hoses, so you can see it's got a crimp collar on it. I'm using the non-swivel ones, which means I need to make sure that my hose angle is in the right orientation for what, for how it's going to fit into the car. So if you're, with a longer hose, it's not quite as critical because you can twist a little bit. But we've still got to make sure they're pointing at the right things. So we're using Earl's crimper here. You can see it's got an adjustment on here. And what we are looking for is a specific dimension once we crimp these. So this is that's the part of the crimpers there. They're all lubed up and slippery. Make sure I'm lined up there. Yep. I've got this tape on the end here because I'm going to be covering this whole hose with heat sleeving. So that's what that is for.
Are you going to heat sleeve it before you crimp it?
No, it slides on.
Okay.
That's what I tested. It was, and then I figured out how to use it. So you can maybe see that I'm lining up the crimp collar with the top of the dies right there. Push it down to kind of lock it. Slide this part of the tool on. Mash the button. And it is crimped. But is it crimped? So you can see I've got a little chart here, and we've got Ultra Pro. We're using number 12, so we're looking for 0.982 to 0.986 on. You can kind of see the ridges on the hose. So between these ridges, I've got to measure with calipers. Somebody stole the calipers. Never mind, they're in the drawer. 0.982 to 986. All right, so 983. 982. 985. All right, we are good. If that dimension didn't work out, I would come in here and adjust the height, smash it again, and then that would be that. So now I'm going to take and wrap this with some heat sleeving. Guess I could take off the piece of tape now. All right, so I'm leaving it just a little bit short there. I'm gonna cut it right ahead of the hose and then slide it on the rest of the way. Go get my scissors. All right, right where I left them. A little snip, snippy. All the way to that end of the hose. Just about all the way to that end of the hose. Another of my little tricks. This one might be controversial to some other people that build cars. I like to take and put just a little bitty dab of anti-seize on AN fittings. Why? So I can take its stuff apart when I want to take it apart. Anytime you're working with aluminum fittings, aluminum on aluminum, there's the possibility that there's a scratch or something, and once they scratch and start chewing on each other, you are not going to be able to get them apart without destroying both of them. So with a little bit of anti-seize on them, you won't have that problem. Now, does that mean they're going to come loose? They shouldn't. As long as you've got them tightened to the right spec. This tape is really kicking my butt. All right, here we go. Okay, so for fittings I know I'm going to take off, just a little bit of anti-seize, and I put a little bit in the threads and kind of wipe it on each end. That way we can actually take this stuff back apart. Now for fittings that I'm screwing in, like say an AN, like an ORB with an O-ring flare on it, like say that's going into a fuel rail or something like that, I actually take and put just a single drop of blue Loctite on them. That way they won't come loose, and it's just enough Loctite that it keeps it, makes it stay put. If you've ever tried to take a hose end off of say a fuel rail, that's where it's threaded in and both fittings start spinning, and then you've got to put 2 wrenches in there and it's just all awkward and aggravating. Well, with a little bit of blue Loctite on there, you shouldn't have to do that. So I'm going to install this. These are the only hoses we're doing the heat sleeving on. I take that back. We're going to do the radiator hoses with the heat sleeving on them too. And those I will have to put on before I put the hose ends on. But we've got that process to make 2 times for every single hose in the entire car. Now we've already made the transmission cooler lines, all that's done. 3/4 of the front fuel system is done. We've got radiator hoses to do. This is one of the oil drains. So we are trucking along. So I'm going to do a time lapse here. Appreciate you guys following along. We'll see you in a few minutes. right, everybody. Well, since the last part of the video, we have gotten a bunch of plumbing stuff done. So I figured I would walk you through it. We kind of just put the cameras down and focused on getting some work done. I had to help CJ go through the Viper because it is on its way to Atlanta for Road Atlanta Trans Am. And then I had to dyno it again. I know I just dynoed it, you know, a couple months ago, but they changed our restrictor size and we have to dyno it with the restrictor size that we race with so that they can have all the data points and to try and balance the field and all that good stuff. So rather than slow myself down filming, we just focused on getting work done. Travis was in here just killing it, getting all kinds of little stuff done for me to come back and finalize. So Travis and I have been working together long enough. We know kind of what each other's talking about without, you know, like fully explaining a situation. Sometimes we don't. And sometimes we argue like brothers, but that's okay. But anyways, we got a ton of stuff done. So I thought I would walk everybody through kind of the stuff that we've got done, where we're headed with the thing, what the plans are for next week to get this thing finished enough to get it where we can display it at Cleetus and Cars. I really want to have it running, but we have to do a lot of wiring between now and then, but most of the plumbing is done. So here we go. So we've gotten the lines done on the transmission. You see 6AN Earl's Ultra Pro crimp together fittings. Also, all of the sensors are connected with Deutsch connectors. So that's for the converter charge, pressure and temperature. The sensor just, or the end of the wire just snaps on to the actual line pressure of the transmission. So that basically tells us if we have adequate pump pressure to make sure all the clutches are clamping inside of the transmission. This is the trans brake solenoid. That's oil pan temperature, you know, the fluid temperature in the pan. And yes, there'll be a huge difference from coming out of the converter versus in the pan. That lets us know how efficient our transmission cooler is working. The trans brake solenoid itself, did I say that was trans brake solenoid? That was this is the dump valve solenoid, not trans brake solenoid. Anyways, this is the trans brake solenoid. And if you see how it's actually plugged into this sensor, well, obviously that's not going to work, but the way we wire sensors in similar areas, we make them to where you can't plug them in wrong. So that's the same Deutsch connector, obviously, because they plug together. But when the harness comes from the car to plug into each of these, the speed sensor cannot accidentally be plugged into the trans brake solenoid. And then we still have to wire into the solenoid to lock up the overdrive. You can see we've got our drive shaft in. And then right here, our happy little transmission cooler lines. They route down through here, up and around. So the reason they go behind this bar here, the plan is to put the battery right here on top of this bar. And it'll be strapped in with its own brackets and everything, and then it will be able to be slid out the back of this bracket right here. So once I make all the hold down and everything, the battery will just slide out of the back. That keeps the battery weight really low in the car. Right in here, we're gonna mount the air pump. You see we got a pretty good hole up in here. So we're gonna mount the air pump and air tank down here in this hole. The drain from the water box. So the water box is going to be up here above the floor, and the drain will come down and kind of stick out of the side here so that the guys will be able to dump the fluid out of there. Over on this side, in this cavity, I'm going to do the catch tank, and that's going to be kind of a catch tank for everything. The valve covers will vent into here, the transmission will vent into here, the overflow for the rear fuel cell will vent into here, the overflow for the intercooler tank So if there's any vent that comes out of anything, it ends up in that tank, which will get dumped after every run. It'll probably have a ball valve on the bottom of it and then a cap over it just in case it leaks. But ball valve to drain that tank out, scoop it into a bucket, dispose of it. You can see we've got our sensors wired back here on Deutsch connectors as well. 3-pin for the wheel speed, 4 for the shock. And back here, we follow the trail of our transmission cooler lines. Back here, we've got the transmission cooler. And you can tell we've kind of thought ahead a little bit, just in case one cooler is not enough. We've made the bracket big enough to where we can mount a second one here if we ever need it. I don't think it's gonna need one because the CFM of this fan, I think, was right at 800 CFM. And that's a lot for a transmission cooler. And especially when we're cruising down the road, we shouldn't be generating a lot of heat just cruising, even though it'd be pulling a trailer. It's not gonna be a very heavy trailer, I don't think. So even the lines being this long will help shed some heat, just, you know, as the lines are coming down the car and there's airflow blowing up against them. Now granted, it's not a lot, maybe 5 degrees, but it's something, you know, with the thing being all the way back here in the back. And this should be blowing down and that air gets drawn out away from the car to dispose of the airflow. But that kind of wraps up underneath. Love this drive shaft. Everything is set up with it. We've got the shifter adjusted. You can see the bottom of our radiator mounts. So these are just a U-shaped saddle that sits on top of this bar. And there's a rubber pad in here. So it isolates the radiator from the hard tube, because that tube is hard mounted to the chassis. And even just like vibrations and stuff can, you know, eventually lead to cracking radiators and stuff. So when I mount a radiator, I build them to where they have just a little bit of give, so they're not seeing all of the vibrations and the harmonics and stuff that the actual chassis is seeing. So I'll lower it down and show you what we're doing for the top side of the radiator mount and some of the other plumbing that we got done. All right, so on the top side of the car, you can see we've got some brackets here that are for mounting the radiator. And right now, I haven't welded them yet. Travis got those made today. And what we are doing here, you can see there's a stud that sticks out of this tube. And there will be a rubber washer on each side of the radiator tab. And then that'll be captured by a nylock nut so that the radiator, like I said, can have just a little bit of give in it to where it's not solid mounted to the chassis. So this radiator mount gets tied back to the turbo mount, which is tied directly to the chassis. The reason we are doing that is because the car will be able to be ran, driven around, and everything just like this. So the front end will be able to be removed. We're gonna fabricate some extra brackets where the fenders bolt to the firewall, or use the stock ones. Depends on how they work out yet. I know I can use the stock ones on the passenger side. The driver's side, I've got to make a little bracket for. But the idea there is, when they're working on the car later down the road, just take the whole front end off the car, makes it a ton easier to get the engine out, access everything to work on it. Just trying to think ahead for stuff on the long run. On that same thought of making things easier to work on, especially on stuff like drag week, we've got this, which is the electric water pump for the engine. So this water pump is made by Davies Craig, and I've had very good luck with that water pump, using it for air to water intercoolers. It's the same water pump we use for the engine on Soccer Mom. So Ruby uses that same pump for her intercooler. They've been great pumps. They flow a lot of water, even when they're under pressure, like a cooling system is going to be. And we've been super happy with them so far. But this is going to be the engine pump, and it's going to be the intercooler pump. So that's around a $200 water pump. Simple. They don't draw a lot of amps. They're very efficient. So with them being that cheap and that small, it's very easy to keep a spare in the trailer for race week. So I'm trying to make it where the car requires less spare parts to make the race week trip. Just like with the fuel pressure regulators for both the street and the race pump, I'm using this Aeromotive fuel pressure regulator. It will be the same pump that's in the back of the car for the street fuel system. They're going to be using the same filters. So we'll have spare filter elements with us. I've got spare O-rings for the fuel pumps. You guys saw us at Rocky Mountain Race Week 2.0 last year. You know, we had a O-ring problem with Ruby with the fuel pump. So we had to take a fuel pump apart. We were struggling with the O-rings. Well, we're gonna already have spares in the box, so it'll be easy to rebuild a fuel pump if we need to rebuild a fuel pump. And you can see where we've got the fuel lines done. So this is the race fuel system here under the intake manifold. This line comes out of the fuel pump, comes up through the filter, directly into the fuel rail. Comes it used at the back with my custom fitting that we made. And then comes out of here, hits the regulator, and then it'll go down and come back in and feed somewhere on the fuel cell that's going to be over here, the front mounted fuel cell. You can also see we've got our air lines done for the boost reference. My throttle cable is kind of in the way right now. And then also the line for the blow off valve. The boost controller solenoids are mounted here, and they run out and split and put pressure on the top side of the gate. So you can see the wastegate hiding down in here. That's that same line right there that hooks up directly to the boost controller solenoids. This line right here is going to hook up to the dome pressure sensor. So how we will be tuning the boost is actually by tuning the dome pressure, which is the pressure that's in the top of the wastegates. That's how we tune the boost control in the car. Once we develop some data points, we'll know, okay, so 10 pounds of dome pressure is 8 pounds of boost, or 15 pounds of dome pressure is 20 pounds of boost. Once we make some runs and work through, you know, the different boost curves and different levels of boost, we'll know how to tune the dome pressure to achieve the boost that we want. And I've had very good success with doing dome pressure stuff. I actually hope to be putting Leroy and Ruby on the dome pressure control too. It's a little harder to wrap your head around to begin with, but once you do, I think it's way better than any other method of boost control. So coming over here to the interior of the car, you can see that we've got most everything assembled into here. The seat belts are installed in the seats. Cleetus was actually here today and test fit in the car and liked the way everything felt. I did a little trick here with the window net where I wrapped this loop around the bar. I noticed the other day when I unsnapped the window net that it fell down and ended up in the door jamb. And it's just like if you ever close a seat belt in the door, it tears up a bunch of stuff, you know, scratches your paint and dents the door frame and the door. So to fix that, put that little loop on there, which also helps keep the net away from the driver a little bit. But you can see now, that's as far as it'll fall. So you just close your door, everything gets captured inside, or you put it on the inside of the bar. Either way, it doesn't end up, can't end up down in the door jamb. Oh, we've got the shifter installed and the parachute mounts. The throttle pedal is in here and done. I've mocked up some of my fittings. These are going to be for the intercooler lines that are going to run through the cab. So we've ordered up some of Motion Race Works' So we've ordered up some pieces from Motion Race Works to run the intercooler lines through the firewall. So it'll be like a bulkhead connector that we'll do somewhere right in here. Line's gonna just go there to there, and then the other line's gonna come around the front, come around and join in with this one. It'll be sealed up nice. There won't be any room for smoke or fire or anything else to get inside the cab from around that joint. Lots and lots and lots of little stuff. It really, building a complete car really takes a lot of time, especially one that you've tried to plan out by thinking ahead and making it easy to work on, making it easy to service, and also making it, you know, run really fast. So it takes a good bit of time. Just some of it's just sitting around and thinking about stuff. You know, I've got, you know, a couple hours in thinking out the wiring for the car and what wires need to go where, and planning everything to make it where I run one big bundle of wires one time to one area of the car, and then that area of the car is done. So that's gonna wrap it up for this video. Appreciate everybody watching. We will see you in the next one.